This podcast is recorded on Aboriginal land. We pay our respects to elders past and present and recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. Welcome back to the Radical Online Leftist Pipeline podcast. My name is Mitch Alexander and I've always been against this.
I'm Tom Tanuki and I've always been against this.
Right.
I'm Celeste Little and I'm going to be for this just for the hell of it.
Celeste has been for this podcast. No, I'm fucked off. We were talking about what we wanted to have a chat about on the podcast this week. And this morning, I think I came in mostly unintelligible in the group chat swing. It's like, I fucking tell you, fucking government. Just the fucking gall of the Australian government to now come out and say that actually what's happening in Gaza, I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but there's some pretty bad stuff going on. And we, the Australian government, we condemn this and we want an immediate ceasefire right now in Gaza. And I fucking hate these cunts. I really, really, to my core, I've never liked them. Anyone listening to this podcast knows that I don't fucking like them. And then since October the 8th, basically, 2023, they've shown themselves to be gutless, pro-genocide cowards who are clearly more concerned about their political career, which you need to understand is as an Australian politician, just the smallest little piece of power, globally speaking. And even then, especially when it comes to Labor, they're really mostly just concerned about their position in the party, which is sad and aggravating and fucked. But today they've come out and they've said that we need a ceasefire in Gaza because what we're seeing now is really fucked.
Yeah.
What we've seen over the last couple of weeks is apparently unprecedented. Tony Burke, again, Tony Burke fucks me off so much, and it may be because he's trying to do this daggy dad shit as well. Like his fucking cunting picture on Instagram is of him like playing a guitar. He's like, oh, I'm just cool. I'm just with it.
I've got to look this up.
Hate it. But so today, this was his fucking quote. He said this in front of all of us who have seen nothing but horrific pictures of a genocide for about 2 years now. Burke has today said,
we've seen too many images of children being killed, of horrific slaughter, of churches being bombed. The images that we've seen have been pretty clear that so much of this is indefensible.
The fact that this cunt now wants to bring up, oh, we've seen churches being bombed, when all they did for the longest time was watch hospitals and churches and schools be bombed and just go, oh, well, look, Israel's looking into it. We think it's okay. Now is when they want to have a fucking problem with it. And what I referenced at the start, what I mentioned was everyone will always have been against this. So the main thing I wanted to say, and I want to say this fucking early in the pod, just get this out of the way. We can't let them rewrite history and say that they are against it when it actually matters. They were not against it for 2 years. They facilitated a genocide. They allowed arms and parts of weapons and whatnot to go to Israel. They did not sanction them. They did not cut any trade. They did not get rid of any ambassadors, nothing. They facilitated a genocide for the longest time. Now they're going to come out and try to rewrite history and gaslight into us into thinking that now it's a problem and now they're being moral. There is a book by Omar El-Akkad called One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This. The three of us, we've leftists, a lot of us have been fucking talking about this forever, but just to give everyone an indication, on October 25th, so 3 weeks after this all started, Omar put out this tweet. One day, when it's safe, when there's no personal downside to calling a thing what it is, when it's too late to hold anyone accountable, everyone will have always been against this. And we're seeing it play out right now. And I knew it was fucking coming, and it's still infuriating and it's still crushing. And in whatever way any of us can, we can't let them get away with it.
Well, it's still absolutely pathetic, though, because are they actually against it? Like what I've read today in the press says that they have signed a condemn and deplore letter with a bunch of other nations, and that's where we're sitting. It's a condemn and deplore letter. It's yet another, multinational letter. I don't know how else to put that, transnational letter, whatever else. Just calling on Israel to act better, essentially.
Yeah.
It's not sanctions. Like, I looked this up this afternoon because I was curious, and the Australian government has had sanctions in place on Russia since 2014 with a couple of tweaks, around about the time that Russia went and invaded Ukraine. Like, they know how to put sanctions in.
Yeah.
They could have put sanctions in ages ago. This government has been far too worried, one, about trade and, what it might do to our markets, two, about their allies and how much we might end up pissing off, the US if we make a strong stance, or the UK or whoever else. And then three, just about stepping on some powerful lobby groups' toes. And so effectively, they've signed a condemn and deplore letter. And condemn and deplore letters, the reason why I keep using that term is that in the union movement, we often refer to condemn and deplore letters. And they're just the angry letters that you write, say, a boss or something, where you want to point out that you're not particularly happy with the way that they're screwing their workers or whatever else, but they don't actually necessarily have any action attached to them. They're just about saying, we're a bit grumpy here, and not doing anything about it necessarily. There's nothing collective attached to this. Like, this government could be stating, no, we will not be trading with these guys anymore. They could be doing that tomorrow, and they're not doing that. They're just signing a letter. It's pathetic. It's actually 2.5 years into it, utterly pathetic.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say that, like, if I had my pickings of any future for these people, you know what I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing them for this one day when this is all done. But it's not going to happen, obviously. I don't even think they're going to get in any trouble. I really don't. I'm that bleak about it all. I don't. And so in that sense, I always feel that I like the sound of Omar's tweet, and I do think that broad consensus will get there. But I don't think, I also am fairly bleak on how siloed out our broad consensus on fucking everything. I mean, if we're in a post-truth world, people's final determination about what world they're living in appears to be completely, we appear to be able to completely bifurcate the way that we see the world and just march off down into different realities, more than ever before. So I feel fairly bleak in that respect. So I don't ever think that they'll ever even get a slap on the wrist, let alone. So I feel it's safe for me to say that in the podcast. So, but I just want to say that, that all those things would be nice. Recriminations or some sort of justice would all be lovely. But I can't help at this stage, nearly 2 years into this genocide, but feel a kind of a joy. Joy's the wrong word. Something positive, a sort of a delight when any remaining bastion of these denialists, and there's still a lot of them with a lot of power in the world, whenever they fall or appear to fold in any respect, I've always had this internal debate over whether to allow yourself to feel some sort of joy. Does it mean anything? Is it all just people covering their asses? Like, I really think it is in the case of Labor. And so I'll give you an example. I saw a piece in the New York Times the other day in which they hosted an Israeli genocide scholar confirming, without a doubt, this has become a campaign of genocide. And I felt a thrill of delight. And with that voice in my head, that, believe you me, has been a voice that I have vocalised, like a lot of us, plenty of times, with that voice in my head still saying, oh, yeah, you fucking want to get in. Now you fucking believe it. After there's fucking We all know there's hundreds of thousands of them dead. They just haven't been able to confirm it yet. Of course you can't. They're still blowing up the fucking rubble. How can you do that, you know? We don't know the untold amounts of dead yet, you know? Oh, now you want to do it. So I have that voice in my head, and I read that voice everywhere online, and they know it's a valid response. But I can't help it. I feel some sort of joy. Speaking as a lifelong anti-Zionist who's in the long play view, who am I to say that? You know, think about all of their Palestinian comrades, you know, here, over there and over here, you know. They've had this has been their life and their family and their extended family. But feeling that joy, you know, to see the world turning in favour of this, and remembering that even if they've killed hundreds of thousands of them, there's still more than 500,000, I think, left that need saving. So we need these bastions of denialism to fall, even if they're doing it out of a sense of covering their ass. And that, I think, is where my delight comes from. I remember it was like last year, and we'd see one or two Israeli kids burning their IDF conscription papers. And there is the understandable voices in the left saying, no, that's not enough. You should be leaving the country. I mean, you know, I have a fucking 18-year-old who's going to leave the country. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a pretty strong statement, I'd say, for a kid that age.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know what I mean? They're fucking telling me from fucking Fitzroy that, you know, this person who's now going to go to jail for their fucking act of resistance is not doing enough because they haven't got magicked a new passport into existence. I always resented it in that sense. And I'm like, well, you know what? I see Israeli anti-Zionists like how I saw fucking German anti-fascists. I like reading about them. You know what I mean? I liked reading about the historical texts about them. They were the fucking among the first ones. And it's a legitimate thing, even if it's not very popular, a very niche pursuit. So but recently, I know all those voices exist, you know what I mean? It's almost a fucking moot point to sit here and have this debate. There are two voices. There's two wolves inside of you. One is going, oh, what, now too little, too late. The other one's going, yes, another fucking bastion falls. But that was over one kid. And just the other day, I saw fucking hundreds of them. Hundreds of Israeli kids all standing in a group, burning them. And that's happening while Gazans are still dying, still being blown into rubble. And so it's hard to feel anything when you know that the fucking tragedy unfolds at an escalating pace. But I felt that delight, you know? And I guess I'm bringing this up. Now, do I feel delight? Do I feel delight at this government's response? No, it didn't stir in me any fucking, you know, joy per se, but it's brought up that for me, and I'm wrestling with it a lot lately. So I'm wondering what you got, where you guys sit on delight versus kind of, you know, a justly sneering kind of, oh yeah, now you want to join in, do you, mate, with your fucking statements? Where do you guys sit on that?
For me, it's helped to look at it at the two different levels. So looking at it not in terms of how good or bad each one is, but sort of the efficacy of each one and sort of evaluating what it's done for. Even in relation to sort of the tweet and the book, there is a book. I'll put the link in the show notes. One day, everyone will have always been against this. And that is talking to the fact that eventually, to maintain any semblance of this, you know, the rules-based order of the Western world, blah, 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 they're going to have to try to say, oh, it was always sort of deplorable. But one thing you sort of touched on, Tom, is that, like, they're not going to face recriminations. They're not going to get into trouble for it. And even when they will say that they have always been against this, this in that statement will have changed. What they're trying to do now and what they have been doing the last 2 years has been trying to set up the historical record to be in their favor. This is something I think I talked about on one of the first episodes. I've definitely talked about it online. But if you look at any of the statements that were coming out from especially America and Australian officials, France and Britain were also really bad. They come out and they say something that's very deliberately worded so as to exclude the reality of what's going on. so that historians looking back on it and people that want to look back on this period in our history are overwhelmed with ahistorical statements from public figures, making it much harder to actually figure out what the fuck was going on the whole time. So all they've done for the last 2 years is set up that there's a war in Gaza. It's the war in Gaza. It's Israel versus Hamas. The Hamas terrorists have these hostages, and we must condemn Hamas because they've got these hostages, and this war in Gaza is being waged by Israel against Hamas. Now we get to a point where it's undeniable. The images are fucking out there of starvation. Maybe with some revisionism, they could say all the buildings blowing up, they were holding Hamas terrorists, and look at all the historical records we've got last year. Now they can't deny the starvation, so they have to pivot. And when I say that they'll always be against this, what they're going to be against is this ahistorical fiction that they have built up for the last 2 years to insulate them from the truth, to insulate the voting public from how bad it is. Because this is the other thing. The three of us and anyone listening to this fucking podcast, you know how bad it is there. But I'm going to say that the majority of Australians don't. The fucking, especially beginning of last year when they cut off aid to UNRWA, most people would still, if you ask them about it now, even if not at the time, would just sort of go, oh, that was, I think there was terrorists in an aid group and they had to investigate it. Yeah. And that's because of all of these statements around it were laying the foundation to be able to deny reality later. But at your point, Tom, there are still good things at a very micro level, and sometimes at macro levels, that signify a sort of shift taking place. So when I see those Israeli kids burning their conscription papers, I do like that. They need to be doing whatever they can fucking do. The protests, the shutting down weapons factories, all that sort of shit builds into it. And I think you can maintain the joy at those things. And it doesn't need to take away the cynicism that you need to have about politicians, even when you analyze those politicians as finally needing to cover their ass because of all the good shit our comrades are doing, forcing their fucking hand into doing this, forcing Tony Burke to finally admit that they're bombing churches in Gaza. Yeah. He should not get any of our joy. Who should get our joy are the people that have fucking made him, all of us, to every small degree that we've done, have made him have to finally speak the fucking truth in some small way, in some small ass-covering way. But he doesn't get my fucking joy. The Australian government doesn't get my joy for these statements. They get my righteous vindication. They get my fuck you finally, of course you fucking have to, because really staunch fucking people that have their fucking families dying overseas for nothing, have forced their hand. That's what gives me the sort of invigorating feeling. The positivity I think you're sort of hinting at, Tom, because it's not joy, it's grim positivity.
Yeah, I get emboldened or something of that order. Yeah.
Look, and just a little bit of revisionism from me. I said 2.5 years before. Can we just strike that from the record and admit that I'm tired? But it does feel like it's been going on for longer, and it feels like we've been trying to get the government to take action for longer. Look, if I'm honest about it, if I think about those kids burning their conscription papers and doing so in the context of Israel and their military system, I would straight out say that those 18-year-old kids have done more to stop the war than what any of our politicians in this country have with their flowery statements and their condemn and applause, because at least those kids, in what power that they have at that time, are trying to shut down this military operation. They are stopping, in some small way, they are stopping the continuation of that violence, that military training, that enforcement. And they are opting out of that system. And to me, that's brave. A condemn and deplore letter that's signed, going, oh, gee, this starvation and firing on starving people, that's a bit bad. That's not an action. That's a letter. Yeah.
Also, that letter still mentions Hamas.
Yes, of course it does.
It's still, and they've gone now to, they condemn the deplorable way Hamas have treated the hostages. They're getting really
delusional.
granular with this shit. Like 800 people, 800 Palestinians have been murdered at aid sites trying to get food because they're fucking starving. The fuck are you bringing Hamas up for? Sorry, you can, for one statement, you don't have to fucking equivocate.
Oh, if they had cared about the hostages, they wouldn't have spent nearly 2 years fucking bombing them into fucking annihilation. Fuck off. We all know that. And you know who else knows it? Everyone in Israel. Everyone who went to one of those huge stop the war, release the hostages, they weren't saying that to Hamas. They were saying that to Netanyahu. That's who they were saying it, because they knew perfectly well that the act of statecraft in that instance necessarily entailed, like any other fucking negotiation, exchange of hostages that ever successfully took place between Israel and Palestine or anywhere else in the world. You got to stop the fighting and then have a chat. You can't do that. We all know. By the way, we all know the lay of the land. We all know that as soon as he stops that war, he's out on his fucking ass, and possibly worse, given that there's fucking charges out for him in international criminal court. Mm-hmm. He knows that perfectly well. He can't stop letting those bombs down.
Yeah.
They all know, everyone in that fucking country who's got a right mind, who's not one of these berserk fucking ultra-Zionists, they all know that it's on him. That's why he can't stop. He's just got to keep aligning with the Warhawks, keep the bombing going.
I just want to also say, I know a lot of journalists at the ABC, at the Age. I know a lot of them are really fucking copping it at the moment because they want to report the truth in Gaza. They've wanted to this entire fucking time and they can't.
Yeah, I get this impression there's a lot of internal strife about this kind of and repression internally, right? Yeah.
So when I go on a tear now about the journalists, quote unquote, at The Guardian, the ABC, The Age, I understand that some of you want to. I also understand that some senior journos and the bureaucrats and administrators there are just massive, evil, cretinous cunts. Coal where their heart should be. Just horrible, evil people. I understand you work under them, join your union, MEAA, and try your best. I understand it's hard. We don't want to lose our jobs. We can't sometimes. It's fucking tough, but sometimes it's fucked, right? But the fucking reporting coming out of especially the ABC and the Guardian now, who have finally found, again, an ass-covering backbone to report on this shit, and they're finally saying, Israel's been bombing tents. 80 people have died in we're finally going to be a little bit cynical about this bomb that fell on a hospital that Israel said they're investigating. We're going to be a little bit fucking critical. But I read this in The Guardian today, and I mean, it's one of the worst constructed sentences I've ever fucking seen in my life. But it's also really indicative of this sentence is trying to give this idea that The Guardian has also always been against this and has been reporting on it well the entire time. But listen to this shit. The latest assault began a day after the highest death toll in 21 months inflicted by the Israeli military on desperate Palestinians seeking food aid, with at least 85 killed in what has become a grim and almost daily slaughter. What the fuck do you mean? The latest assault began a day after the highest death toll in 21 months? What the fuck are you talking about? It's not at all. This idea that it's just been 21 months of a war and there's been some civilian casualties. There's been some, accidental deaths. And now the Israeli military is inflicting these deaths on desperate Palestinians seeking food aid. Where the fuck was The Guardian when desperate Palestinians were hiding in schools and hospitals and churches that were being bombed? Where the fuck was the ABC when that shit was happening? Yeah. Now we're being told broadly by our media class that this is indefensible. But they've been fucking silent for 2 years. And this shit is fucking pathetic and deplorable. It's evil. It is the truest and most literal version of evil that we have in the world. I don't think the devil exists, but I think this shit is satanic. It is like it's using the lives of these people to maintain Western hegemony. It's literally using them as sacrifice.
Yeah.
It's just, it's satanic from all of them.
Yeah. Horrific.
So my last little thing on this is everywhere you can, especially if you see politicians, don't let them be comfortable. Let them know that you think that they're evil, horrible, cretinous, pro-genocidal pieces of shit. Because they shouldn't be allowed to just be in public without facing consequences for this. We're all humans. They're the worst of us. They should be fucking reminded of it.
I didn't want to talk about Chip Legrand. No, I wanted to talk about Homer Eugene Legrand V.
There's no way it's real.
That was
not real.
Just as a bit of background, everyone, some of our listeners will be aware that that's Chip Legrand's name, Homer Eugene Legrand V. It's been a thing. It's been bandied a bit here and there. Well, Mitch didn't know that, and so was committed that the first time I would say it in full was when I was introducing this sort of bit, you know. So yeah, it's amazing because I didn't know it as well. Apparently, if you were among Twitter circles, you would have heard it years ago. It's been bandied about here and there. I never fucking knew. I first heard it last year. I was like, "You're fucking joking! Surely this isn't public." Surely this is the best. I was like ready to cracking my knuckles, like, let's make media about this, this bit of trivia, you know, because it's so funny. But no, it is no. Homer Eugene Legrand V has look. It's just the other day. He's come out with a little article. Hang on a sec. There is an article called. Written by Alex McKinnon for his former
That's
blog.
who it was. I was trying to remember who wrote it. Yeah.
Yeah. He did an article for he used to have that Everything Is Fine blog. Of course, he now does deep cut news with another journo. And it does go into a bit into his family. So if anyone wants to find out more about it, just type in how Chip Legrand got his name. If you type that in, you should come up with the Everything Is Fine.
I'll put the link to that in the show notes. I've got it here. Alex McKinnon tweeted out, "I did a shameful amount of research to answer one of the urgent questions of our time. What's the go with Chip Legrand's name?"
Yeah. It's a shameful name. But look, either way, Chip certainly sounds a lot more rugged and working class, doesn't it? Although in a kind of filtered through a bit of a slightly Americanized lens, I feel. Chip. You know what I mean?
Well, we did have Chips Rafferty. Maybe it needs to be Chips if it's going to be more rugged and Australian.
We'll send him we'll edit his name then.
Chips Legrand.
Chips Legrand. Chips Legrand. That's cute, actually. Chips Legrand. He's come out a couple of days ago with another thing about anti-Semitism, the crisis of our time, anti-Semitism. It's an article called "Online Hate Report Exposes Overt Effort to Normalise Anti-Semitism." Now, it shares the findings of the Online Hate Prevention Institute, which I got to say, I have a familiarity with. I have chatted to the guy who runs it, Andre Obola, for over the years here and there. I've been aware of his work. I think through some contacts, he once helped me. This is a bit of trivia here. Many years ago, helped me to get my Facebook page reinstalled because back then they used to employ staff that would kind of like get rid of terrorist stuff and like the real nasty, passy, far right, anti-Semitic stuff, white nationalists, that kind of filth. And so back then they used to sort of have people deal with that, and he had contacts with them. So, I think that's how it happened because mine got removed under that, and so he had to contact them and say, "Oh, you made a mistake here. It wasn't what you thought." So that was really nice. It's the only time anyone's ever been able to speak to someone at Facebook in the history of fucking mankind. Back before we all stopped using it. Anyway, so Andre, I was talking for a good bloke, but I guess I never, the fault lines that I had focused on, I always counted myself an anti-Zionist, but I never explored, for example, the fact that, as I now know, Andre was one of the people who was at the work group that led to the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. So he was there several years ago when they came up with that. And for listeners who aren't too aware of this is where a lot of our institutional fault lines, stem from nowadays regarding, classic dictionary definitions of anti-Semitism, other, progressive anti-Zionist, anti-racist, what have you, traditional definition of anti-Semitism. And then the kinds of ones that they have, like this one that they use, that are being adopted increasingly and are being used to repress free speech, and the IHRA definition basically greatly expands what is considered to be anti-Semitism, and it includes things like, I'll quote here examples: denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, for example, by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavour. That's one of the things that it says is anti-Semitic. Another thing it says is like drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. And I see where you're coming from there, Andre, and I see where you're coming from there, everyone at the IHRA, because I know what you're saying. You're saying, it plays into old Jewish power conspiracies. They all talk about anti-Semitism as an ancient shape-shifting virus. They love that terminology. I get it, and I probably used it myself in the past. Where we run into problems is where this state of Israel is actually doing Nazi-like stuff. What else are we supposed to say,
And it's one of those weird things where listening to that, it's like they're putting the cart before the horse, in that like what they're pointing to are what can be and have been anti-Semitic like statements from anti-Semites, right? Like you said, yeah, I could see how you could make a very anti-Semitic statement comparing Israel to Nazi Germany. But that's not in and of itself anti-Semitic, as you just said. If it so happens that there are fucking comparisons to be made. You can't say beforehand that any utterance of that type of comparison is going to be anti-Semitic. It's just not how that works. It's not, because it doesn't speak to the fundamental issue of what anti-Semitism is, which is bigotry against Jewish people, Judaism, and all that sort of foul shit. It's not how that works. You can't make a definition like that.
Yeah. Well, here's the problem, though. Once it's the definition got there, but progressively and through the lobbying skills of the Zionist lobby here and abroad and in America and what have you, there have been institutions that have progressively taken it on. Certainly, quite rapidly in America, even before the genocide, even before 2023. There's like, you can find some very good articles on Jewish Currents, great progressive Jewish source of news and anti-Zionist thought. And they were already talking about how so many state legislatures in America had adopted it, and, it was causing problems for anti-Zionists all abroad there. And similarly in Europe, I mean, most notably in Germany, where their idea of like reconciliation with the aftermath of the Holocaust is really about entrenching Zionism, and a slavish dedication to the state of Israel in their agenda. So I digress. The article by Chip, it quotes several of the 100 plus tweets that are contained. Basically, the report looks at 113 different tweets, and Chip Legrand's article looks at some of them, and it's just, we run into the same problem that I have every time I look at these things. When I look at the Executive Council of Australian Jewry and their anti-Semitism reports that go on to be referenced and fucking used as data by our special anti-Semitism envoy, to influence or to recommend government policy. When I look at the actual examples, and to Andre's credit, he's provided far more of his data set in this report than the Executive Council ever provided in their anti-Semitism reports. He's more open disclosure, open book about these things. You know what I mean? He does know what he's doing a lot more than any of the hacks at the council do, certainly. But I look at them in there and I'm like, well, we come down to this issue of like, I know what you're saying, but I don't think that fits necessarily my definition of anti-Semitism. You know what I mean? Or my more textbook definition. This fits your special, greatly expanded, special, secret, hidden dictionary version of anti-Semitism, which was made in order to facilitate consent for the fucking demolition of Palestine. So there are things quoted in there, like about how there are overt anti-Semites, who are riddled throughout the report.
Oh, are you telling me that they found some tweets that were just real fucking foul anti-Semitism? There were someone had posted on X some like pro-Nazi or anti-Semitic. Really?
It's funny that, isn't it? It is funny.
They just took 113 tweets from Kanye's account.
But well, these are the kinds of natures of these reports, though, aren't they? You know what I mean? I mean, you can make a whole fucking, I don't know, I'm speaking just more generally, this whole like countering violent extremism like path, it's like for academics can make entire careers out of like screenshotting tweets. You know what I mean? And then taking it that as and considering that a data set, I mean, how do you know if half of these fucking things were bots? Anyway, posts that are like, I won't read out the genuinely anti-Semitic ones, but then there's ones that are borderline in the sense, and I'll just take one as an example without going through heaps of them. The suspect is very likely a Mossad agent, and the intent of this false flag is obvious. So, I think that if you look in the expanded IHRA definition, or even if you look at other versions, you can definitely see that there's a cause for concern about there is an intersection with talk of Mossad and discussion about wider Jewish power conspiracies, So we know we're entering into territory like my little spider alarm can definitely go off when I see Mossad being talked about. I'm like, most of the time when I start reading someone in a Facebook comment or a fucking Twitter comment talking about Mossad, I know I'm not going to be reading historically accurate information, and that's my first reaction, But I must also say that in the context of what Israeli state intelligence does here and abroad and through lobbyist groups and what have you, to furnish consent, and political will among the broader world and the world's governments for what has always been a campaign of displacement and, colonialism, like concentration camps in the case of Gaza and what have you, but is now a campaign of genocide. They've all, in the context of that actually occurring and of a great deal of things occurring, sometimes at the hand of Mossad, sometimes at the hand of lobbyist groups that do lend themselves to these kinds of paranoias and fears and conspiracies. They are doing a lot of on-the-nose shit. They do pay for a lot of on-the-nose shit to happen. Mossad did pay for someone to use an Australian and Israeli dual passport to fake it to go and kill someone in Dubai. That happened, a Hamas member and what have you. That really did happen. They really are a cheeky intelligence service. They really do a lot of stuff. They are cheeky. That's a fucking understatement of the year. This is not the appropriate word, but
cheeky Mossad.
You know what I mean? I like it. I'm staying with it. They're cheeky.
No, they are. They're cheeky.
What I mean? They are.
Oh,
They're
bloody hell.
Cheeky.
Mossad.
In the context of that, in the context of the fact that it took only a few months after that fucking Adass synagogue thing for there to actually be false flag attacks. I mean, sure, they were paid for by a fucking organised criminal overseas who was trying to have fake anti-Semitic crimes to use as a bargaining chip for his fucking to barter his sentence down. You know what I mean? That's what happened with the childcare centre in Maroubra, and we know that happened. But there were false flag attacks in this environment. It's hard for you to. It's hard for me to accept that you can say, oh well, that's rooted in a anti-Semitic power conspiracy about the Jews secretly controlling the world, because it could just as well be rooted in a more or less clear understanding of how Mossad works and how faked attacks in order to furnish consent and how the Zionist lobby works. It could just as well be read out of that. just further to all this, there was and I think this helps to clear up some of this stuff in practice. You remember that court ruling not long ago in Australia, the Wertheim versus Haddad ruling, in which a judge in the federal court basically put into his case law that anti-Zionism is not the same as anti-Semitism. You recall this not long ago? Yeah. Well, Andre Ebola of the OHPI, who wrote that report, he was called on as expert witness for both sides.
Mm-hmm.
So when that ruling came out, and he read it, and, he'd obviously been part of this court thing, and then this fucking case law now says anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. You know what I mean? He grants an actual precedent for that. Dr. Ebola was not particularly happy, because Mr. I'm a signatory to the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism has now been part of a fucking hearing that culminated in verifying the separation between the two. So he wasn't happy. And something he wrote here was, he goes, most of the case was very clear-cut. Dr. Ebola's evidence on what was anti-Semitic was accepted by both sides. Where the judgment gets a bit tangled is where, somewhat out of the blue, it asserts that criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitic. That is, of course, perfectly true, but with some exceptions. For example, applying the tropes of traditional anti-Semitism to Israel instead of Jews is indeed anti-Semitic. The thing is, if it's a trope of traditional anti-Semitism as far as lobbying, power, conspiracies and such, and we apply that standard to Israel when we're looking at what they're doing to Palestinians and how they're trying to convince the rest of the world to get on side, well, I'm sorry, but we're just going to have to look at the broader context of the politics of the person saying it. Like, read their other fucking tweets, for example, to tell me if they look like an anti-Zionist or anti-Semite, like I fucking do. That's the problem with taking little screenshot data sets of one thing this person said. I'm sorry, that's not going to cut the fucking mustard. And in fact, it's making you look, Dr. Ebola, like the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, taking things out of context just to help furnish Australian government consent for a fucking genocide, It's not good enough. And I keep seeing these come up again and again, Is someone an anti-Semite or an anti-Zionist? You can't tell from sometimes, from one tweet alone. I mean, you can tell when they're a overt anti-Semite, when they're a raging one. You can. But if you can't, rather than seeing it snapshotted in your report and then tying into your greatly umbrella big tent definition of anti-Semitism, we need more information. We need to know more about this, because beyond that, I just don't fucking trust it. And I hate the way that these things end up being used and considered as like, the background and the data sets and the report findings that influence institutional and government policy, because they're just that it's hack shit, So that's what I have to say about that.
For me, it's like, part of the problem again is like what we've railed against on this pod a lot is trying to come up with laws that need codification around these sort of things. Like you just said, Tom, it's like these expanding definitions of anti-Semitism get into the fact that you can't tell based on ever increasingly vague statements made by people whether it is an anti-Semitic utterance or not. Just to throw it as well, like Dr. Max Kaiser from the Jewish Council of Australia, the executive officer, has talked about the discredited IHRA definition of anti-Semitism because it doesn't fucking work as a definition. It can point to instances of. That report could have come out and gone, we looked at 113 tweets and we investigated the accounts of those people. And with better quantitative analysis and qualitative analysis of those tweets, we have determined how anti-Semitism is sort of, rising or not. Yeah. But the thing for me, and like speaking of the Jewish Council of Australia, they have said this pretty explicitly in a number of spots. Activists and writers and whatnot have been talking about this a lot. But the shit that we've seen from groups like the, IHRA, different groups like that are pushing these curtailments of free speech and of basically of democracy on people is itself what fuels anti-Semitism. So, like, to take a sort of to take a step back.
That's the bottom line. Yeah,
I want to take a step back and look at this in a sort of bigger picture. These tweets that you picked out, Tom. I wanted to read this one. Like, the suspect is very likely a Mossad agent, and the intention of this false flag is obvious. Another person claimed the Zios did it. Smokescreen. Another one was, I wouldn't be surprised if the Israelis in Melbourne burned down their own synagogue. They, Israelis, love to play the victim. The problem with these sorts of things, these curtailments of freedom, this allowing of a genocide, is that the crazies and the bigots and the neo-Nazis add fuel to the fire because they can point to overreaches and they can point to real dumb shit and go, look at what they're doing. Where people on our side are like, no, we're not fucking talking about Jewish people at all. We're talking about the actions of a state. We're talking about definable political groups. And all it takes is for bigots and racists and Nazis to go, no, we're not. We're talking about the enemy. It's like, don't make it easier for them to spread bullshit. And again, it's the Jewish Council of Australia has been forthright about this sort of stuff, is that when this type of shit, when these community disrupting things happen, when these curtailments to democracy and free speech happen and are pushed in the name of Jews and Judaism instead of Israel and instead of Zionism, that's them conflating these horrible things with Judaism. And so you've already got dumb cunts on the line being like, oh, I don't know, maybe it is the Jews. And that's where that fermenting of the bigotry can happen. It's giving those morons fertile ground to have their bigotry sprouted. That's what's fucked about this.
Yeah, look, maybe that's where I'm sitting here a bit silent, pondering stuff, because I got to say, I don't really, at large, as a broad sweep statement, trust Australian definitions of any of this at all. Australia does not understand racism. I don't think that there's much of a hope that our powers that be will ever get a grasp on anti-Semitism. And to be honest, like, if I'm thinking historically, Australia's support for the nation state of Israel itself was tied in anti-Semitic attitudes at the time, because on 2 or 3 occasions, the Kimberley Plan, which was an alternative plan to Israel, was brought before government and was rejected because the Australian governments of the time were scared that Jewish people would go floating down into the cities and change the culture of the cities. So Australian support, and therefore Australia being a part of what became the Petition Plan, which led to Israel being recognised as a nation state, was itself rooted in anti-Semitism. So when it comes to our definitions here, I don't think that most people who are saying that they get it actually do get it, and they certainly don't understand the history of it.
Celeste, what are you saying? That Australian discourse on any kind of racism is not cutting edge?
Well, I don't know where I get that view from, but yeah. Look, I just wanted to grab, what are a couple of short minutes, because we have been talking a bit about Israel, Palestine. This kind of ties in a very weird way. And the weird way is that what I'm going to talk about is housing for at-risk older women in Hobart. So how am I going to tie this together?
I believe, come on.
I can do this. Look, there was a news article that I saw yesterday that really grabbed my attention, and it's about this couple in Hobart, a couple of retirees, Richard and Jan Gould, who have decided to sink their retirement savings into creating a low-cost accommodation house or facility for at-risk, older women. So they're talking 40s, 50s, 60s onwards, older women at risk of homelessness. And on the surface, to me, this sounded fantastic. And I loved what they were saying with regards to why they were doing it. It was sort of, there is a homelessness crisis in Hobart. In fact, I think as far as the capital cities go, it's about the second worst in the country when it comes to the rental markets and the vacancy rates, just after Darwin at this point. And it was the worst until not very long ago. But there was something that grabbed me because, there was a lot of talk about them taking stuff into their own hands. But what did grab me when I was digging into this was that they came across this problem, being in online good karma networks and finding out and using their own Airbnb listing in order to house some of these women that they're now trying to provide a bigger space for. So essentially, an Airbnb that they have and that they were renting out under that sort of auspice. When it was vacant, they were taking it upon themselves to house some of these vulnerable women. And that's where it jumped out at me for, because one of the biggest bits of news that I've seen when it comes to what is contributing to the homelessness crisis and the rental crisis in Hobart right now is the fact that short-term rentals and Airbnbs are going through the roof, and landlords are currently evicting long-term tenants in order to turn their properties into Airbnbs because it is more profitable to do so. And how that ties in is, of course, Airbnb right now is is listed on the BDS list. So it was roundabout. I got there.
We got there.
I got there, but it does occur to me that and I was pulled up for saying something a bit negative because apparently the property is within their own house, so the Airbnb listing is within their own house, but that's still, if you've got a room in your place and you're looking to house someone, then that is still a room that could be rented to an at-risk person who can't get a rental property. The crisis, the rental crisis in Hobart and in other places which are being impacted by these short-term rentals, and the fact that there continuously seems to be governments and councils that are unable to do anything about it. They get another property that's looking for approval to turn itself into a short-term rental, and they just end up ticking it off when there are actually, as this couple have demonstrated through this action, a significant portion of the population that is finding themselves more and more at risk of homelessness and of not having that sort of stable accommodation that they need to live full lives. To me, that is, it's friggin' messed up. It's a bit of a tragedy. Before she got herself a bit cancelled, I don't know how to put that nicely, but a bit cancelled for some really messed up comments with regards to rape, I thought, and also around gender diversity and trans folks. Jermaine Greer was actually talking a little bit about how elderly women were the population who were becoming more and more at risk of homelessness. And a lot of this has to do with, things like retirement savings, the super gap, where there's been marriage separations or something and things haven't been divided up. Like, this is a population that is at risk, and it has been identified, and it was identified quite a long time ago. So it does warm my heart to see a pair of people taking action that governments have continuously failed to do. But you have to wonder why we've got this vicious cycle, and if we were able to get governments to properly legislate against things like these short-term, these sorts of gig economy accommodation, essentially.
Yeah.
You know, like they have in other places of the world. I think they've done it quite successfully in Berlin, from memory. You know, if Australian governments were getting on the front foot with that sort of stuff, would we be seeing this sort of stuff happen? Would we be seeing these news articles coming through?
Well, that's always the sort of thing, isn't it? Is that like what you want is the government to be filling in that gap. And like this is that thing that, you know, whenever you see those stories of like, you know, this kid took 4 after-school jobs and works 120 hours a week. What a hard worker. He's paying for cancer medication. It's like, no, that's bad. That's a bad really story. Bad. Like, it's heartwarming in the, again, that thing talking about with Tom of like, in the micro, it is a nice sentiment or it's a nice action. But if you like take a step back and see, like what you said, what it's a symptom of, why it exists, what's that sort of stuff. With our fucking government, like this headline from the ABC that came out today, the 22nd of the 7th, homelessness under Albanese government, worst in living memory, Peak Body warns. Like what? That's like when you say, oh, they could legislate against like short-term rentals, like they're not legislating anything. They're not doing anything to stop this. Like, and the number of people accessing homelessness services each month has increased by 10% since Labor was elected in May 2022. 10%.
Yeah.
That's fucking huge. And like, what they're not doing is trying to slow down the housing prices, trying to cap the number of Airbnbs. Don't get rid of it. Just keep them where they are now. No, it can't do that. Like, we've got such a huge fucking problem that, like, you know, it might be interesting to know as well. My mum runs a service, Facebook, in the Northern Rivers area for older women needing crisis accommodation and like rentals, basically. And has told a lot of people, like, trying to advertise their Airbnbs to fuck right off. And some of them don't even understand why it's a thing. So I've listed on Airbnb, it's available for this week. It's like, it's Airbnb prices. We want people in homes. We want people secure. And yeah, until our government gets rid of the financial incentives, it's not going to change.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, it may change before that, just because there's only so much a society can take. And like Melbourne and Sydney will last a lot longer. But I think somewhere like Hobart, which is really quite small.
It's a tiny little place. And this is why, you know, Hobart and Darwin, I said, you know, bottom 2 on the list. Like, they are the tiny capitals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think when they're that small, it doesn't take too many acts of deprivation for people to go, oh no, this is fucked. Like, this is not worth my profit margin at this point. I want something to be done regardless. I need something to be done. And that is sort of, you know, again, where the work of, you know, fringe left political parties, activists and whatnot come into it, is raising the awareness of these issues and connecting it to the lived experiences that people have. And what really fucking sucks is that our governments are going to let that get to a point where, like, older women, people's fucking mothers and aunties, do you know what I mean? Like, successful people will suddenly have their parents who never had problems really before falling into this fucking mess. Because, and this is what we're seeing everywhere with homelessness increasing. I think people are starting to recognize that homelessness isn't long-term rough sleeping in a park. It is couch surfing with friends. It is going between share houses without being on the lease. It is occasionally sleeping in the car. Mm-hmm. And more people are facing that. And I think a lot of people are starting to go, this is a fixable fucking solution, though. We're seeing the empty houses. We're seeing the costs being too high. We're seeing all these Airbnbs. You got to do something. It's right. The Airbnbs are right fucking there.
Yeah.
Take a principled stand for once in your life at state or federal level. But yeah, I don't know. I don't want to fall into Taniki levels of cynicism, but I'm always like, I don't know if they will. I don't know.
Well, we may as well, because we're currently playing the role of Jordan as we
Yeah, true.
Look, the other thing that does occur to me and jumps out at me from this, because there's the Airbnb aspect, and there's also the continual outsourcing of the homelessness problem. And this is a private property that that private citizens have decided to buy and offer privately. Every single time we do hear something being done by a government with regards to precarious housing, it is that coded social housing, which is outsourced, outsourced housing. It's not public housing. It's actually getting some sort of organization to come in and oversee it. So the government doesn't actually need to take responsibility. They may fund it to a certain extent or put sort of
resources, quote unquote.
They may put that into it, but they're not running it. They're not actually serving the problem. And so when it does get outsourced, when these problems get outsourced over and over again, there's a risk of quality. There's a risk of there's a risk. God, what was I thinking? Say you've got somebody who is in a religious org and their lifestyle just clashes up against the values of that social housing that is run by the religious org. Like there's opportunities for people to find themselves homeless again just because of of who they are and what that organization stands for. It is worrying. It is worrying that we do have to continue to rely on the goodness of private citizens or outsourced companies with regards to this problem. And I really believe overall, whether it's the Airbnb angle or this angle, the government needs to actually do something.
Yeah.
Like, we shouldn't be seeing the increases that you mentioned.
Exactly. I mean, nationalize it. This is my thing for everything. Nationalize it. And it's always, if you're not aware of this sort of distinction, if this is the first time you're hearing it, public housing is the word you want to hear. Social housing is bullshit. That's not even anything. That is a mix of public and community housing. Community housing is when they bring like NGOs or, like you mentioned, charities or whatnot to administer and run the operation, and governments are somewhat involved with financing and resources and stuff, but it's outsourcing basically. Yeah.
And as somebody who grew up in Canberra in the 80s, where public housing was just absolutely everywhere, and these were quality houses in fresh built suburbs, like to see the deterioration of that, like to see that
culturally.
My goodness. And it was always like, I am going to admit that Canberra was probably likely to have a better quality of public housing than what we saw across the country, because culturally that was where Canberra was at as well. I went to school with a bunch of kids whose parents earned a lot of money but didn't believe in private education. Like this was the sort of mentality that we saw. So public housing in Canberra tended to be quality, and it tended to just blend in with the surroundings. It was like every other house on the street. And to see that deterioration to this sort of level happen over decades is extraordinarily bad.
Which is, again, a government choice. Yeah. They've decided to both leave it underfunded or unfunded entirely in some instances, and to also let that cultural rot sink in, and to let public housing be a signifier of the immorality of the person, for housos to sort of, take root culturally. This is something that, like, I was reading this book, now one of my favorite books. It's this beautiful piece of fiction called The Hands of the Emperor. It's a fantasy book, but it's about government bureaucracy. Leave me alone. I'm a big nerd. But it had this small section in it, which I think speaks to more about sort of government framing being the first step for these sort of things. Like I just mentioned that we've had governments not fund public housing properly, but one of the characters in this book talks just about this sort of idea that not only do we have like public housing to support the poorest in society, to give them the stability that they need to not fall into proper homelessness, but the government as well ran a worldwide, but in this case it could be Australia-wide competition with architects and designers to come up with housing so beautiful and enviable that people want to live there. And that got me. And it's getting me again now thinking about it, because we could have a government that wants to make public housing so fucking beautiful that people want to live there. People strive to live there. And we could just change our attitude in Australia to do that. And we don't have to just read fiction about that. They do that in fucking France.
Yeah.
They do that in Europe. They make sure that the public housing has a station in their culture that people find beautiful.
I believe they did that in fucking Utah in in America a few years back, because they decided to build quality public housing and have supported facilities attached to them, like say drug rehab facilities or whatever else.
Right.
In order, because it was significantly cheaper for them to house people in quality housing and make sure they had everything they needed in order to live a successful life and build up their own self-esteem and whatever else. It's actually in so many cases it's actually cheaper to house people in beautiful housing in where they want to live. Yeah,
we don't just have to like put them in crates.
Yeah.
Like we can, that just always gets back to like, Australia, I think culturally has a blind spot when it comes to housing in the same way Americans do with guns and medicine. Like you can't convince an American that the rest of the world is fine not having guns. They all think we're weird. And I feel like Australians have this deep ingrained thing where it's like, well, yeah, houses are worth $2 million each and only some of us should have them and everyone else should be lifelong renters and it should suck shit. And it's like, no. It doesn't have to do that. And also we can change that attitude pretty fucking quickly. I always go on about how Australia Day was, instantiated on January 26th in my lifetime. Just wasn't the case.
Yeah.
Was the thing. Now, 30 years on, all we talk about is how you can't touch our sacred day. Give it 20 years, 15 years. And if you had a government that wanted to lead and wanted to build beautiful public housing that people want to live in, it would change our fucking attitudes and we would instantly be a nation that would be proud of our public housing. Look at our good architecture. Look at how good we could have it all, Celeste. We could fucking, it's right there. Our utopia is right there. And our utopia is also just still a basically neoliberal hellscape. It's just sunnier. We're just comfortable. We've got more treats, right? This isn't even, automated communism. This is just Menzies.
Like it's our partial.
Menzies. If you've got an idea for a utopia, send us an email. alpdotgov@proton.me. I want to hear your utopian takes. I want some good vibe emails.
Clearly we need some inspo.
Yeah.